Hi everyone, this is my February 2024 reading wrap-up. Now this month I read 10 books, which is a lot for me, and I think that's due to various reasons that I'll mention throughout this video. But without further ado, let's just get into it. So first up is Mules and Men by Zora Neale Hurston. This book follows Hurston as she travels to the American South to collect oral histories about two topics, and that's folktales and hoodoo. What's interesting to me is that these two topics are juxtaposed quite beautifully, and that folktales are a very public act, while hoodoo is quite secretive. This juxtaposition definitely comes through in the text, and it just made my little anthropological heart sing. Now, speaking of anthropology, I am an anthropologically trained archaeologist, and I have done my fair share of grad school. And I have to say, I'm quite disappointed that even though I was acquainted with Zora Neale Hurston, we never read her texts in graduate school. For me, this seems like such a gap because this is a seminal work, and I can already see from a first reading how important it is to the history of anthropology. Now, I'm not the first person to point this out, and there's some great work by Black feminist anthropologists that I'm going to link below. If you've already read this as an ebook or a physical book, I really recommend trying out the audiobook. The narrator, Ruby Dee, does a fantastic job, and she really brought the stories and the dialogue to life. Now, I listened to an abridged version, which I usually don't do, and that's just because I couldn't find an unabridged version. And one day, if I get my hands on a copy of the unabridged version, I would really like to read it and consume it and just see how it differs from the abridged version. Also, one point of confusion for me is that the publishers labeled this book as fiction. Now, for me personally, I would say this would be nonfiction because it's recounting a very real anthropological expedition of going down to the American South and collecting oral histories. Now, I will say there have been some reports that certain elements have been fictionalized, but again, that's still a gray area. So yeah, the whole categorization of the book I found to be a little confusing. However, this is such a fascinating and clearly important work and a solid 4.5-star read for me. Next up is Well-Read Black Girl by Gloria Eden. This book is an anthology that celebrates the practice of reading amongst Black women. Now, anthologies are usually hit or miss because sometimes there are stories that you like and sometimes that you don't. But I have to say, I really enjoyed every single story in this anthology. Every chapter is well written and well edited and quite diverse. I listened to this and it was quite powerful, but I also want a digital or physical version so I can make some notes. I think this is an anthology that I could easily listen to over and over again and get something different out of it each time. What's also really cool about this book is that there are a number of reading lists, so if you want to read more books by Black women, this is a great starting point. I overall really enjoyed this anthology, and the backstory behind Well-Read Black Girl is quite fascinating too, and I'll link that Instagram account below. But yeah, this was definitely a 5-star read for me. Next up is Queer Ducks by Elliot Schrefer. This book explores the science behind queerness in the animal kingdom. I learned so much about animals and aspects of the history of science when reading this book. To me, this is truly excellent science writing. Schrefer does a great job of highlighting the fuzziness of science and the gaps in our understanding about certain things. Schrefer does a great job of letting the reader know when something's known or unknown, where the nuances are in certain situations, and where the interpretation is coming through. And it doesn't feel patronizing at all, it really just feels like transparency. I personally really love the excerpts and interviews with scientists whose works were featured throughout the book. Now, I listened to this book as an audiobook and the ensemble narration was fantastic. However, I think I would also like to pick up the physical copy because there are illustrations in it that look to be quite fun. So yeah, this was an excellent book and a 5-star read for me. Next up is Tales of the Celestial Kingdom by Sue Lynn Tan. This book is a series of short stories and perspectives from various characters in the Celestial Kingdom duology. I think this is a must-read for any fan of the Celestial Kingdom duology. However, if you've never read the duology and you're debating whether to do so, I think the first 2 stories in this book will give you a good idea of Sue Lynn Tan's writing style, and she does mention this in the intro to the book. I really enjoyed this and I inhaled this. I mainly read this as an ebook, but I listened to parts of the audiobook and I really enjoyed the woman lead narrator. However, the male lead narrator wasn't personally for me. These stories add depth and closure to the duology in such a beautiful way, and I really enjoyed re-meeting these characters again. Now, the Celestial Kingdom duology is written from the perspective of of the main protagonist, Shin Yin. However, in this book, you get to see Su-Lin Tan write from different perspectives and different characters, which I found to be really great. It was really cool to finally get in the heads of these other characters and just hear and see what they were thinking. Now, the author Su-Lin Tan mentioned that all her personal proceeds from this book will go to charity. She mentioned this on Instagram, and those charities include the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund as well as UNICEF, and I thought that was pretty awesome. And I really hope the publisher will match those donations some type of way. So yeah, I really love this short collection of stories, and it was a solid 4.75 star read for me. Next up is How to Train Your Goblin King by Erin Beer. This book follows Floss, who's an aspiring law student and social justice advocate, and one day her niece goes missing and she has to travel to the Goblin realm to retrieve her. Now, I'll be forthright, I have such mixed feelings about this book. I really love that the main character was a woman of color, but I was really frustrated by her as a character in general. While she is social justice minded, she has this very privileged, almost puritanical worldview. And it takes quite a long time to change that worldview, even though she's portrayed as quite intelligent and really mindful of the law and how other people are treated. When I was reading this, I wasn't sure if it was meant to be campy or not. However, there are other things I did enjoy, like the diverse array of characters represented in this book. Now, this is a romantasy book, so there is a love connection, but the love connection felt off to me. Now, it comes to light that there's an age gap, and that's because humans and goblins age differently, and I think that would be okay in certain instances and can be done quite well. However, the way it was done in this book didn't make it so believable to me, because it wasn't that there was an age difference, there also felt like a significant maturity difference. And that maturity difference was visible in the get-go to me, and I didn't see enough character development to shorten that gap. The pacing was also a bit touch and go for me. At some points it felt like it was moving at a good pace, relatively quick, given the events of what was going on. And then other parts just felt like it dragged on. So while I think the premise of the book was fascinating, the execution wasn't it for me. However, I'll be on the lookout for other works from this author, and it was a 3-star read for me. Next up is A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon by Sarah Howley. This book follows Marielle, who's a witch who struggles with aspects of her magic. She ends up accidentally summoning a demon, and her mom walks in shortly thereafter and she claims that they are dating. Now, fake dating isn't a trope that I usually gravitate to, but I thought the author set this up in a very believable way to me. Now, as a plant lover, I appreciated all the plant imagery and the fact that Marielle was quite gifted at plant magic. I also love the female friendships that were displayed in this book, as well as talking about toxic parents and your relationships with them and how to go about navigating boundaries. Now, overall, I really enjoyed Marielle as a character, but there were parts of her behavior that just didn't make sense to me. It felt a bit erratic. And it would be one thing if she was just being fickle or messy. I think those add wonderful complexity to a character. However, there were certain responses and actions she had that didn't really align with the character that I thought was being developed. Also, I know a classic plot point in romances is the misunderstanding. However, I felt that the misunderstanding between Marielle and Oz, the main male lead, it wasn't believable to me, and it just took a bit of the enjoyment away from the book. Overall, it was a fun read, and I'll be sure to check out more books in this series when I'm feeling like a romance, and it was a 3.75 star read for me. The next books are part of the Mead Mishap series by Kimberly Lemming, and I'll be honest, I read every available book in this series, which is a total of 5 books. The 5th one I technically read or finished reading on March 1st, but I'm including it in this wrap-up just so it makes sense. Now, the Mead Mishap series centers Black female leads from the fictional town of Boohail. Now, when it comes to a fantasy, the overall world building is light, and some people have criticized the series because of the use of modern language, which is a whole other debate in itself, but it personally did not bother me in the least bit. I actually really enjoyed the dialogue throughout all the books in the series because Kimberly Lemming does a great job writing hilarious dialogue. Now, the main trope in all of these books is fated love, which I don't love, but I really enjoyed Lemming's writing, so I stuck with this series happily. Another theme of this book is that a lot of the non-human men have not interacted with many women in a while, and there's a reason for that, which I'll get to. However, female pleasure is centered and celebrated. And I should mention that these are steamy novels, so if you like or are interested in much more explicit romantic scenes, then this might be a series for you to check out. For me, I'm kind of ambivalent towards it, but I really just enjoy the dialogue so much that I wanted to keep reading the rest of the series. Another theme throughout all the books is this idea of consent, and there were times where the line of consent was very blurry, but it didn't feel like an afterthought. It felt more of an interrogation. So the line of consent in certain stories left me feeling different ways, but it is a prominent theme throughout all the books. Now, just to reiterate, this is a steamy, spicy forward series, and I highly recommend reading the trigger warnings before starting the series. So now I'm going to go through each book one by one and give you my impressions of them. Now, the first book in the series is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. The main protagonist here is Cinnamon, playfully known as Sin, and basically she's walking home one day after a festival, drunk, and she hears a noise, and it turns out to be a demon. She saves the demon, but then the demon tries to attack her, but then comes to his senses and then asks or kind of commands her help for this quest to destroy the goddess of that realm. Turns out this goddess isn't a goddess, and her action of keeping demons outside of the human world was for her own desire for power and control. So this book follows these two soon-to-be lovers as they go on to destroy this goddess. Overall, I think this was my favorite book in the series. I really loved the main character, Cinnamon, here. And I think her dialogue was just absolutely hilarious. So this one was a 4-star read for me. Next up is a short story called Mistlefoe. And this is a very short story, almost too short for me personally. The instant love felt so quick, but my favorite part of this very short story slash novella slash book was the introduction of this enchanted sword named Alexis, who is raunchy, says everything you're thinking but you don't want to say, and she's probably one of my favorite characters of the entire series. So seeing her kind of origin story was really fascinating and my favorite part of this book. But overall, it was a 3-star book for me. Next up is That Time I Got Drunk and Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf. Now this story follows Cinnamon's best friend Bree and a werewolf named Felix and their love story, but there's also a really fascinating side story that's going on that I don't want to give away. Overall, I really enjoyed this book as well, and it emulated parts of the first book that I really enjoyed, and it was overall a 4-star read for me. Next up is another short story called A Bump in Boohail, and for me, this one worked better than Mistlefoe because it just felt like revisiting old friends. You didn't need a lot of space for character development because you knew who the characters were already, but you just got to interact with them during this festival time in their town. So this was a 3.75-star read for me. Now the last book in the series is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Human. It follows a female lead who has connections to Cinnamon and Bree, but I don't want to give that away, even though it'll become quite clear once you open the book, and Dante, an older dragon. While I enjoyed their writing, and I enjoyed the characters as individuals, I didn't love the romantic connection between the characters. Now, the main female protagonist is, I think, quite young and quite inexperienced because she's been locked away in a tower for 5 years, so from when she was 18 to 23. On the other hand, you have Dante, who's a much older dragon, older than Cinnamon's husband, who's also a dragon. He is quite inexperienced when it comes with social interactions with humans. However, I don't think that gap in social understanding resolves the gap between him and the female main protagonist when it comes to life experience and worldviews. Now, as you read the book, you have certain information as a reader that the two main characters do not. So you know that something's eventually going to come out and you're just waiting for it to happen. So of the 3 longer stories in this series, this was my least favorite, but I still enjoyed the dialogue and getting an ending to the series. However, there might be more books in the series coming out. on my research, I couldn't find any more news on it. So yeah, out of the 3 longer stories, this was my least favorite, but of course I read it because I wanted to know what was happening, and it was a 3.5-star read for me. Now, as you probably noticed, I read a lot of romance and romantasy this past month, more so than usual. Now, the reason for that is that I have been going through a depressive spell, which I am fortunately out of, but I found romance and romantasy to be quite a comfort read. Now, if you experience depression and you're curious about my strategies for reading while being depressed, check out this video here. That's all for this video, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.